You're in the sweet spot, baby. You're in the sweet spot, girl. You're in the sweet spot, darling. It's a magical kingdom in a mixed-up world. You're in the sweet spot, baby. You're in the sweet spot, girl. You're in the sweet spot, darling. It's a magical kingdom in a mixed-up world. Welcome to the Sweet Spot Podcast. My name is Lynn, your host, and Ken's my co-host. Ken, what's going on?
Oh, Lynn, it is going. I'm looking forward to this episode of the Sweet Spot.
Ken and I are both former Disneyland Custodial cast members, and we talk about Disneyland. We are the #1 Disneyland podcast, hosted by former Disneyland Custodial cast members.
#1.
This is episode 354.
What?
Yes.
That's hard to believe, Lynn.
It really is.
That's impressive.
Very impressive.
Oh.
And I was thinking about it the other day, and I thought 354, but that's not counting our current event episodes. And then remember, I did those the bonus or the mini episodes.
Yeah, you did many episodes during the lockdowns and such.
Yeah, so probably 400 episodes of the Sweet Spot is out there somewhere.
Well, we're going to have to keep going at least until we hit 749.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, a few more years, I guess. We are also authors of the books Queening the Kingdom. If you want to get them signed and paperback, both of them, we have them on our website at thesweepspot.com. And we also have the audio versions of those books that come on USB flash drives for a limited time. And those are signed also at our website. You can also get our books on Amazon, and you can also buy the audio and the digital copies like Kindle and stuff, like where those are found, and audiobooks where those are found, like Audible and stuff. You can also get our audiobooks there. Also, if you want to help support the show and help us out and also get something in return, you can join our Patreon, where you get one bonus episode per month. It's just Ken and I talking. Sometimes they're 20, 30, 40 minutes. This last one we did in February was Ken's trip report. And if you, from Disneyland, he went to Disneyland. It wasn't a trip. So he went to Disneyland. It was a trip for a couple miles from your house. So, but he went to Disneyland. He hadn't been there in a while, and it was a really fun report. And you can still listen to that. Like normally, if you were to join, you wouldn't get it until the next month. But if you join, I'll know that it's probably because you want to hear Ken's trip report, and I will email you that after you join our Patreon. So.
I want to mention one more thing. If you go to Amazon to buy our books, while you're there, buy some books from Jim Korkis.
Yes.
We mentioned it in the previous, the current events from last week. Jim underwent some major surgery. He's recovering as of this recording. So you can buy his books and really encourage him and help him out. And the books are great. So buy him his gifts, buy them for yourself. We can't recommend his books more highly than we already do. So thank you very much for doing that.
Yes, Jim would appreciate it too. And we do also. Plus, his books are really good. So you get to help him out, and you get to some great information. Ken, who is our guest tonight?
Well, we have John Bilka, who was a Disneyland custodial busser in the early 1970s. So the bussers were the people who assigned to certain restaurants to keep those clean, because as sweepers we didn't do those areas. We did the walkways, the attractions, the shops, but the restaurants were handled either by food staff or custodial bussers, and he was one of those.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear his story. So let's get right into that. Plan your next getaway vacation to a Disney destination by contacting our friends at Concierge, our magical travel and vacation planning partners.
Whether you're going to Walt Disney World, Disneyland, a Disney cruise, Disney's Aulani in Hawaii, or Adventures by Disney, contact the people who specialize in Disney. Want to visit Universal? Concierge can help you with that too. It's not going to add any cost to your vacation. Go to concierge.com, that is CONCIEARS.com, like concierge and mouse ears, because they are your travel concierge to Disney, with you every step of the way.
They can get you reservations, update you on changes, conditions, and take away the stress of planning a vacation. Let them do the heavy lifting.
I send my own mother to Concierge. We like them so much, Lynn works with them. I wouldn't plan another Disney vacation without going to Concierge.
Mention the sweep spot when you book a package with them, like a week on a Disney cruise or a hotel stay with theme park admission tickets, and get a special gift. So, Jim, did you grow up going to Disneyland? Was that something you did as a child?
I grew up in Anaheim, spent most of my childhood in Anaheim.
Mm-hmm.
But as a kid, I think I've only went to Disneyland a couple times. We weren't really a Disneyland family.
Right. And what made you decide to get a job at Disneyland?
Okay, the last time I was at Disneyland, I was in 8th grade, and walking around, I figured, oh, it'd be cool to work here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then when I was in high school, I think it was junior year, I was talking to one of my chemistry teachers, and she was a captain in Storybook Land. And she was telling me how it was a great place to work and how much fun she had every summer working there. And back in those days, a lot of teachers worked at Disneyland during the summer.
So you went down to apply.
I actually, in those days, you got an application in the mail. You sent a letter off to them. They send you an application in the mail,
Mm-hmm.
and they sent you this little booklet called Casting for Our Role in Our Disneyland Show. I still have that little booklet.
Oh.
And it tells you what to expect, and, you had to be a certain height and weight. You had to have a car. And then, I guess it was a couple months later, they sent me a letter to come in for an interview.
Wow. So when was this about? What time?
I first sent them a letter in January of 70.
Okay.
Because you had to be 18, and I turned 18 December of 69.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was probably March when they finally sent me this little booklet and then scheduled me for an interview.
So you went down and...
Yeah, I went down. It was in an afternoon, and that was probably the first part of April.
Mm-hmm.
Went down for the interview, and it turned out the guy who interviewed me was a guidance counselor at one of the high schools.
Oh.
Yeah, a lot of back in the day, it was a lot of school people because of just the way the hours worked out.
Yeah.
When the schools were out, Disneyland needed more people, and when the schools were in, there were fewer people needed. So.
Right. And at the time, I was going to Modern Day High School in Santa Ana. So I already had basically the Disneyland look.
Right.
Because remember in 1970, Beatles and whatever, everybody had fairly long hair. Well, if you
Yeah.
went to Catholic high school, you didn't.
Right. Yeah, the Disney look has changed quite a bit since then.
Oh, yeah. Last time I was there, yeah, it's way different.
Way different. Yeah.
And then I know in your books you guys talk about a lot of this stuff, but, that was, in those days, there really wasn't a Disneyland University. When I was basically through with the interview, they asked, okay, what do you want to work? We have, and it was janitorial or food service.
Huh.
And the guy who interviewed me said, if I was you, I'd do janitorial.
Yeah.
So, okay. And in janitorial busboy. So when I showed up, it was the first part of May of 1970. You showed up in the admin building, which is right there near, at that time, near the employee parking lot. Mm-hmm. And you got a quick and dirty, this is Disneyland, this is what we do. They gave you this book called Disneyland and You, and it basically set out everything that you had to know at Disneyland. And then they took you, that was about 3 to 4 hours. Then they took you on a little tour, showed you where the time cards were at the old guard shack there on Harbor, walked around the corner and showed you where wardrobe was, walked past the locker room, and then we kind of went through the park and started dropping off people. If you were in food service, they dropped you off on Main Street or in whichever land you were going to work in. If you were like I was, there was a couple of us who worked janitorial, and they took us back to the old janitorial office, which was behind Plaza Gardens and right there next to Casa de Fritos. You walked in, and the guy who was the clerk kind of greeted you and said, okay, this is where your time card goes. You punch in, you change, you walk here, you put your time cards in the rack alphabetically, and right there was a, in those days, mimeograph schedule, and it showed what times you were working and where. And I'll never forget my first day, during this orientation, Chuck comes out. And now this is the guy head of janitorial.
Yeah.
And you're scared to death. You're an 18-year-old kid. You don't know what to expect. And Chuck was just super, super nice. Mm-hmm. And he gave us a little rundown. I'll never forget. He says, hey, we're all family here. I don't care if you're a busboy. I don't care if you're a sweeper. If you see a mess, clean it up. And then that was it. That was orientation. I looked on my schedule, saw where I was supposed to work like the following Saturday, and away we went.
Where was your first assignment at?
Well, I worked there more often than anywhere else but Coke Terrace.
Okay.
In Tomorrowland.
Yeah.
My first shift was a day shift, and I reported to Wayne Culver there. And Wayne gave me like the quick on-the-job training. This is what you do. This is where you go. And let's go. We started working.
Oh, boy.
Wow.
Things have changed since then.
Yeah, yeah.
And in those days, all us new guys, everything was a 6.5-hour shift. You rarely got an 8-hour shift.
And that was at the time, they were getting ready. Granted, it was going to go into high gear in 1971, but they were getting ready for Walt Disney World.
Right. And, jumping ahead a little bit, there's some more story in there, but jumping ahead a little bit, Wayne ended up going to Walt Disney World, and I don't know, for some reason he took a shine to me, and he asked me if I wanted to go with him to Walt Disney World.
Oh, wow.
And I would have considered it, but you got to remember at that time the Vietnam War was still going on.
Yeah.
So by going to Walt Disney World, I would have lost my student deferment and went back to 1A and probably would have been drafted like instantly.
Right. Yeah.
So, it was a whole different world then. And then it was, I don't know, about a week, 2 weeks later, I started working from 7 at night till 1:30 in the morning for Steve Donovan, still at Coke Terrace.
Oh, yeah. Wow. And that was when they'd have a lot of bands, especially in the summertime. They had a lot of music over there.
Oh, at, I guess, somewhere around 6 in the afternoon, we'd start clearing off the dance floor, and I got there at 7, and, it was shortly thereafter, dancing and kids and everybody would show up. Tomorrowland was kind of the place to be in the 70s.
It really was, and, not too far, near that time, you had the 1967 Tomorrowland, which, introduced the People Mover and Carousel Progress and ventured through inner space. So Tomorrowland was still fairly a new place to be.
And we also, I know you talked to one of the guys, we used to have the space bar right across the little walkway there, and it was under the rocket jets, the People Mover, and between the two, Coke Terrace and the space bar, they were going full blast all night.
Wow.
Yeah, I would think so. Wow.
And this was pre Space Mountain. You still had 6 more years before that, 7 more years. So.
Yeah, we still had the giant rocket sitting there, and it was a whole different time before Space Mountain.
Yeah. So you were mainly over there. Did you ever get any other shifts that were in another location?
Well, that first, summer, it was all Coke Terrace.
Right.
And then, remember, I was hired in like a casual, so at the end of summer, that was it. I was gone. But towards the end of August, Ray walked up to me one night and says, "Congratulations, we're keeping you on. You'll be a C." And in those days, they had A, Bs, and Cs.
Right.
And Cs usually worked less than 20 hours a week. So then, it was tough to make ends meet if you weren't living with mom and dad.
When I hired in, it was still, you still basically had that. You had the casual, you had the casual temporary or casual seasonals, which gained no seniority whatsoever. It was just like, end of summer, you're expected to be gone or whatever, or come back for Thanksgiving or whatever. But there was the casual regulars, which would, do full time in the summer basically, but also the weekends, holidays, you had to be available by a certain time on Fridays, that sort of thing. But the casual regulars, you were accumulating some seniority and all that. So, but then of course, you had you had a couple other things, but the top level was A. A was
right
classified as regular full time. So even if you were B, you could be working full time, but you were. It was called regular part time, but you could be working full time. So yeah.
And also, the park was closed on Monday, Tuesday.
Oh, right.
Oh, that's
so
right.
I'd usually work like Saturday, Sunday, 6.5 hours per day, and then pick up either a Monday or a Tuesday, which was that was an 8-hour shift. And we'd scrub chairs, scrub floors, clean tables, whatever needed to be done. And in 1970, people still got dressed up to go to Disneyland. So the guys would wear black polished shoes, which left marks all over the chair legs.
Yeah.
And we'd spend hours with Scotch-Brite pads scrubbing the black off those chair legs.
Yeah, I would think so. Wow, yeah. Well, I mean, in 1970, the park was only 15 years old. You know,
Right.
I mean, you think about it. California Adventure's been open, what, 22 years now? You know,
Hmm. And
for
yeah, I hate to think that was like 50 years ago. But anyway,
Yeah.
and everything was still painted asphalt. There was very few places that were concrete.
Hmm.
So you know, scrape gum and power wash, you know, the rounds everywhere. And ketchup. Chuck hated ketchup because it would spray every place.
Uh-huh.
And you'd be up there, you know, on your tippy toes scrubbing ketchup off the side of a wall or awning.
And
But then
yeah.
winter of 70, that's when I started, you know, working at every other food stand in the park. Every restaurant where janitorial busboys were,
Hmm.
I was there. And, geez, I mean, we worked for all the old time foremen, and I worked days and nights, Fantasyland. You know, there was no Bear Country yet, but all of Frontierland, uh, Plaza Gardens at night was always fun because they always had a band playing there
Oh
too.
yeah.
hmm.
Now I got to say, one of the worst places I ever worked was the tuna boat
Oh.
Oh,
Why was that?
because you were isolated in the middle of nowhere by yourself.
Oh.
So on a long night, you know, it's dark and people aren't going to go to the tuna boat. So
Uh-huh.
you'd be there trying to kill time all night.
Oh.
It was just really slow.
oh boy. When you
But
did at the at Tomorrowland Terrace, would you take your breaks downstairs or what?
yes, we all went downstairs.
Hmm.
Food service, uh, janitorial, we were all downstairs.
Yeah, that was kind of the downstairs underneath that was kind of the prototype for what they did at Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom with the utilidors. You know, you had a whole thing there that went back behind the Carousel of Progress. The tunnel went over to behind the Carousel of Progress. But yeah,
And it came out the other end near the Matterhorn at where the old House of Tomorrow sat.
Hmm.
right.
Only by then it was gone, and they used to call it Alpine Gardens.
Oh yeah.
And it's the only place I worked at Disneyland where we had a trash door upstairs.
Hmm.
We'd dump all the trash in the door and go down the chute to a compactor down in the tunnel.
Right, right. They added when they built the Space Mountain complex, and they had the Space Place restaurant there between Flight to the Moon or Rocket to the Moon and Space Mountain. They had one of those upstairs at Space Place there. They had, you know, they had copied what they did at Tomorrowland Terrace. Yeah, it's convenient because otherwise you can't. I mean, how are you going to get it downstairs? You got to have a chute, I guess. You know.
Right. And, you know, the first summer, you guys are familiar with the new, like, brown, thick plastic trash liners.
Hmm.
Yes.
Well, back then, we had these flimsy green things that were always leaking, splitting, getting holes in them, and it was just miserable. You were mopping up spills all night.
Yeah, the ones that we worked with were resin, you know, hard
Right.
resin, and they started making some out of recycled material. Those would because of a dye they would use, they would end up black. But yeah, because they try, you know, they would still eventually get a leak, depending. So once they got a leak, you either used it, you know, backstage, bagged. You know, now they bag all the cans because it used to be distinguishing busing from sweeping areas would often involve the sweepers didn't have bags in their cans, and then the busters did. But that's changed in recent years. They're all bagged now. So
Oh, when I
yeah,
was there were no bags, period. It was just a liner. And I
wow.
remember, I think it was a winter of like 1971-ish, and a company came in with those brown resin liners, and they were trying to convince, you know, Chuck, Tom, Ray, this is what we need to use. And I remember Ray filled one with water and dumped it off the top of the janitorial office. Let it hit the ground, and if it didn't break, he was going to buy them. Well, it didn't break, so they bought them.
Uh-huh.
And things were simpler in those days. Now
it was a simpler time.
It was.
Yes, a lot simpler. I mean, okay, a trash can was full. You pull out the liner and use your foot to stomp it down and shove it back in.
Yep.
Well, they'd have a stroke if they saw you doing that now.
Yeah.
I mean, to empty your pan, you just lifted the lid of the trash can, shoved the pan in, turned it upside down, and dumped it. Pulled it back out and kept going. Plus, back then we were more, I think, family. There wasn't this real distinction between food service and janitorial and whatever. If you saw somebody that needed help, you just helped them. It didn't make a difference. If you saw, you know, a popcorn spill out in front of the Matterhorn, you just walk over real quick and sweep it up and walk back.
Yeah.
I mean, there wasn't this defined, this is your area, don't move.
Yeah.
And plus, we were all, you know, the bus boys were janitorial. We weren't food.
Right. Yeah, it was, there was that attitude in custodial that, you know, if I can do this, I'll do it, you know, move something, or, you know, if a drinking fountain drain was clogged up, now the facilities might not have liked it, but if we could unclog it, we would. And, you know, they would prefer you call out a plumber, you know, but it was, you know, sometimes it's a union thing, but, you know, that the attitude was, if we can do it, we will.
Yeah. And back then, very few of the different jobs were contracted out. It was like 99.9% Disneyland employees. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you'd be happy to help a guy push a popcorn cart, whatever, because we were all the same family.
Yeah, and a lot of the management was a, you know, part of the, you know, original, you know, work there with Walt when he was there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a couple supervisors that actually, yeah, they were hired in by Walt. Mm-hmm. I mean, Joe Spindler was the big one I worked for.
Yeah.
The only guy in the park with the mustache. And his claim to fame was, one, his little pencil mustache, and two, that he was hired in by Walt. And when he was hired in, he had that mustache, and I guess they made some agreement that he wouldn't shave, and he never did.
Wow.
See, there was a lot of characters back in those days.
Oh, really? Do tell.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, you know, a couple stories about Joe. There was a cigarette machine right next to Fantasyland 2, where we worked. Mm-hmm. Well, he was forever catching kids buying cigarettes. And he'd bust them and say, hey, you're not 18. Here's your choices. You can either give me the cigarettes, or I'll call security and have you thrown out of the park. Well, of course, they gave him the cigarettes.
Yeah.
So in our little maintenance closet in the inside of the restaurant, there was a whole, like, cartons of cigarettes that he had collected.
Oh, my gosh.
You know, you can't do any of that stuff today.
Oh, no.
No, there was a lot of stuff that, even stuff that we did that they can't do now, you know. And then Lynn and I didn't come along until the 1990s, so, you know.
Yeah, 20 years after I left.
Yeah.
But, you know, and, you know, places like Riverbell Terrace, Fantasyland, if you got to know the people in food service, you ate real well. Because they'd always, you know, help you out. Or even Casa de Fritos was a little bit tougher because the janitorial office was next door. But if you worked nights, the girls would always, you know, slip you some food to keep you going. And remember, we were all starving college kids.
Yeah, so every little bit helped.
Oh, yeah. And I think after it opened, the one other place I hated was Bear Country. And mainly because the restaurant there sits right on the water.
Mm-hmm.
And at night, it'd get cold and really damp. And it was just miserable to work in that cold dampness. And, okay, now going way back, somebody in wardrobe decided you were going to wear these god-awful boots. First of all, they were super uncomfortable. And second of all, when they first got them, they had leather soles and leather heels, fresh from whatever boot maker. So at night, when it's cold and damp, it was like skating. I mean, those boots were so slick, you just go flying down the ramp in front of the, I guess, Hungry Bear restaurant.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And then after about, I want to say a month, somebody decided, hey, we should put rubber soles on these boots. But, at the time working there, we got to clean up all the construction debris and whatever before Bear Country opened.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there was a bunch of us they grabbed to go into the Country Bear Jamboree and see the show before it opened.
Oh, nice.
Oh, and it was great.
Yeah.
They didn't have the original soundtrack. They had this kind of improvised soundtrack so they could see how the different characters, their mouths would move and whatever. Mm-hmm. And some of it was kind of R-rated.
Yeah.
So it was fun to sit there and watch. And then when it opened, of course, they cleaned all that stuff up.
Right.
But I know before Roy Disney died, mm-hmm. the back areas of Disneyland had these huge warehouses, and they didn't throw anything away. Everything was back there. And one day, Wayne took me on a tour of the back area, and they had the old Vista liner that used to run, I guess, I don't know, it was where the boats and everything are now, or were
right.
now.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Pre-monorail, yeah.
Viewliner. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, powered by an Oldsmobile 454 gas engine, on and on. But, just seeing it sitting there, they had old, like the flying saucers still sitting there.
Wow.
Well, then once Roy Disney died, it was like garage sale time. Everything went out the door.
Wonder why.
Yeah, that probably changed a lot when he was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like we're going to scrap all this old stuff and get rid of it. And at the time they still had one like whole monorail train sitting there.
Wow.
And I guess eventually they went to Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm. Well, remember the monorail. I think the monorail and the trains were part of Retlaw,
right?
Which the Disney family controlled up until a certain point. So yeah.
And if you worked for Retlaw, you were golden.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, those guys. I mean, those were like the cream of the crop guys because they worked directly for the Disney family. That's where their paychecks came from.
Wow, it just seems, because it's so nowadays it's so corporate,
Oh, yeah. I mean,
the family involvement is, that went out. Ron Miller was CEO and until that point in 1984, and then ever since then it's just been. Well, actually, I mean, Diane and Sharon, Walt's daughters, were still involved in the board for a while. But nowadays, it's just so corporate. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And all the employees were like family who had fun together. We had canoe races, the old Mickey Mouse Theater, which is in Fantasyland. The employees would put on their plays, and we'd all show up in the middle of the night and see their plays. And we worked together and we played together, and we had just a good time. it was like a big college fraternity or sorority. Everybody you knew went to college, and you all hung out together, you partied together, and you went to work together. I haven't seen that Disneyland for a long time.
Did you get to work any special events like grad nights or anything like that?
Oh, grad nights were murder.
Yeah.
Because you know, everybody else is home in bed, and you're going to work, and you get off at, I think I was getting off at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, and yeah, some of them were worse than others, and I won't mention any of the names, because they were just hell to work. I mean, these people just made a mess of the place. And then Bear Country is one of those places that if you worked downstairs at the restaurant, there's a way at the very end of the patio, you can kind of jump a little wall and end up in the bushes, back in the back. And forever we were, they finally gave us flashlights to chase the kids out of the bushes.
Yeah, back that was the end of the park. I mean, it was as far as the guest areas were concerned, that was a dead end back there.
Yep.
In recent years, they've opened it up with Galaxy's Edge, the Star Wars edition, where you have this walkway right alongside, a walkway between the restaurant and the rivers. So it's no longer just this, complete dead end. But back then, that was it. It was the wilderness.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of kids took advantage of that. And, remember and things weren't as strict as they are now. So a lot of these kids would smuggle in their liquor. And, of course, they'd ride rides when they're half intoxicated and then throw up all over the park. So we were constantly cleaning it up.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
You're just barely removed from high school. So you're almost the same age as the kids that are coming in.
Oh, true, yeah.
So a lot of guys, who were working would make dates with girls who were at the local high schools who came in for grad night.
That's funny. I could see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, and Ray worked a lot of those nights.
Oh, yeah?
And he kind of put a damper on some of the date making. If you were standing there in one place talking to somebody, all of a sudden he'd appear out of the darkness.
Yeah. Well, when I was a foreman, I would either help a guy out or thwart him, depending on how well he was doing for me. So there was like one guy I was trying to help out. He was talking to some girl from another department. And I came up to them and I said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I told him, I say, hey, I just saw how you helped that old lady out there. And I just want to tell you how, what a great guy you are and all that sort of thing. And he's like, he's not catching on. He's like, what do you, what do you, and the girl, she caught on right away, was just laughing. She goes, he's trying to help you out.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm like, okay, well, carry on. Now, if I didn't like him, if he was doing a lousy job, if he was supposed to be out on stage, I'd walk by and say, hey, I'll just say, Joe, hey, Joe, your boyfriend called. He wants you to pick up some eggs on the way home,
Yeah, or your wife just called.
Or your wife just called, yeah, depending, and so I'm just like, talk about, you can get yourself in real trouble doing something like that,
Yeah.
But yeah, so I could totally see Ray, saying, hey, come on now, get back to work.
Mm-hmm. And I know one day working at Coke Terrace, I had been talking to this young lady for a while, and Ray walks up and says, time to get back to work. I said, okay, in a minute, and finished talking to her and walked away. And Ray says, I can't have that. And I looked at him and said, Ray, do you know who that is? And he goes, no. And I said, her grandfather's the King of Spain. Oh, if you want to talk to her some more, go ahead.
Wow.
And she was there with two older ladies as her chaperone.
Uh-huh.
And she was asking me, what it's like to work at Disneyland and be with all the kids and whatever. And, you just can't walk away and ignore her.
Yeah.
But, I look back and there was a lot of good times. I mean, celebrities we met. One day at Casa de Fritos, I ended up talking to Vin Scully for quite a while.
Oh,
he
nice.
was there with
Nice.
his wife.
Yeah.
And then every once in a while, getting back to, these special parties and whatever, they had one going on, and usually the Golden Horseshoe wouldn't be open. But that night, it was going full blast. And I remember I and one of the cooks from Riverbell Terrace were on our break, sitting behind, the Golden Horseshoe. In those days, they had a little break area down there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just talking, and this guy walks up and says, one of you gents have a light? And we looked up, and it was Jimmy Durante.
Oh.
And he was appearing at the Golden Horseshoe. And, of course, the guy I was with had a book of matches, gave him a match. And he goes, you mind if I sit? He sat for about 20 minutes and just kept us in stitches. And finally he says, well, boys, show must go on. And he got up and disappeared into the back of the Golden Horseshoe. And we just looked at each other and couldn't believe that Jimmy Durante came and sat with us and talked.
That's
Oh,
neat.
wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's the kind of stuff I don't know if it ever happens there anymore like it did back then.
The celebrities now, I mean, most of them are going to have escorts now that, like, you don't have necessarily the performances and the park that you used to, If you think about some of the people, Louis Armstrong and,
Oh, yeah. Carnation Plaza Gardens. You'd have all those guys come in at night. The old, 40s, 50s bands were playing.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Louis Armstrong there one night. I mean,
Wow.
it was great. Especially when you're a young kid, and this was pre-internet, and you only saw these guys on a black and white TV, and now all of a sudden they're right in front of you in person.
Wow. That's neat. Yeah. I wish I could go back and see some, because I like that jazz, big band music. I always wish I can go back and see that.
Oh, I mean, if you worked Plaza Gardens at night, it was great. I mean, some of the bands they had at Tomorrowland were good, and some of them were not so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, having grown up with the big bands and whatever at home, to see these people live, it's like, wow, unbelievable.
And how long did you end up working at Disneyland?
I started in May of 70 and left in June of 73. It got to the point where, okay, I'm 21 years old. I want to move out of mom and dad's house, but there's no way I can do it working on 18 hours a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went to work for the Postal Service, and I got to say, back then, Disneyland paid real well. Going back to the post office, I took a 75-cent an hour cut in pay, but it was
Wow.
full-time with benefits.
Oh.
Right. Well, but even, even people who got 40 hours or 40 plus hours a week, when I was there, it was enough to live off of, but it really wasn't enough to, for me, it wasn't enough to build a future.
Right.
So, it was like, either you have to find a higher paying position in the company or outside of the company. So,
And when I was there, to progress from like a C to a B or an A was almost impossible. You'd spend years as a
Right.
C. And plus Vietnam was starting to wind down, so we had a lot of guys that left Disneyland that went into the military, and they're all coming back. Well, most of them were full-time when they left, so they're coming back and they're making them full-time. So it was really tough to progress up the levels.
Yeah, like I said, the park hadn't been open that long, and if you had somebody who basically started when they were in their late teens or early 20s when the park opened, and they're making a career out of it, they're still in the middle of their time there,
Right.
and
a
so they're
lot
not.
of the
You
foremen,
don't have a lot of turnover. You don't have a lot of turnover. They're staying there.
no. And a lot of the foremen were like World War II vets, because that's only 10 years after World War II ended that the park opened. So those guys showed up in 55, and they're still in their early 30s. So they're going to be there a long time.
Right.
And I know a lot of the ride operators I knew, they had been there for years and years. They were some of the originals.
Club 55ers, they're called.
Yes, sir. And for a while, one of the guys I knew from Frontierland, he used to drive the stagecoach. And that shows you how long he'd been there.
Yeah, right. One of the earliest attractions at the resort.
Yeah,
the
and
park.
Back then, if you watch some of the old videos, there's one of the stagecoach going by, and the guy who's riding shotgun is smoking a cigarette. And halfway through the video, he just flips the cigarette into the river and keeps going.
Oh, my gosh.
Couldn't do that today.
Wow.
But, everybody, has something, their Ray Sedeas story. Well, I've got mine, too.
Yeah.
One day, and I want to say it's probably 72, 73, and the parades are starting. Well, I'm working, again, in Tomorrowland Terrace, and I was on the side near the Matterhorn, and Ray comes up and says, "You know how to use a push broom?" Yes. Come on, you're working the parade. You go down there and okay, what do I do? Well, he points to one of the sweepers and says, he'll show you. So it's like, okay. And I think that was the one and only parade I ever worked, and I used a push broom. But I know Ray's background, he was going to become a cop. So he went to school and had his degree in criminal justice. So one night, sitting out there in the cold, we were talking, and we talked about criminal justice and whatever. And little did I know, 12 years later, I became a federal law enforcement agent.
Oh.
So where did you... So you moved on from the post office then?
No, I started out as a letter carrier. Then I went into maintenance in the post office, which was basically as a millwright, working on their big machinery and whatever. Finished my degree at the University of Laverne and became a postal inspector.
Ah, okay, yes. Wow. Disneyland alumni are everywhere,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And, it's probably the best thing I did, because at 53, I walked out of the door, and I've been retired ever since. Remember, federal law enforcement is mandatory retirement at 57. Mm-hmm. Well, at 53, I had the age, I had the time, so I said, okay. But believe me, especially in that later part of my career, things you learned at Disneyland carried through. Mm-hmm. I mean, you used to stand there on slow nights or whatever and observe people. And, as part of the job, you'd go out and observe what people were doing, what they were, wearing, whatever. Plus, Disneyland, you learn a lot of patience. On a July 4th that's shoulder to shoulder in the park, you learn patience.
Yeah, I mean, people, they say, oh, it's unskilled labor and stuff like that, but you would definitely learn some tricks of the trade, and you would learn a lot about people. And it's a great place to learn about people, and there are certain things you develop if you work there and you do a good job. So,
and you learn to work with all kinds of different people. I mean, you may be all college kids, but you all came from different backgrounds and you had different life stories. And I can say I got along with everybody I worked with. They were all, decent people, but they all had different backgrounds. One thing we didn't have in janitorial was any women. The only women were the matrons that cleaned the women's restrooms. That was it.
That was okay. Yes, because back then it was considered. Yeah, they would only have the women do the restrooms, and so it was a guys' club. It was a regular guys' club.
Exactly. It was a fraternity.
And the days that the park was open, it was completely different from the days it was closed. Because as you mentioned, all the heavy cleaning during the days it was closed, but when it was open, it was a matter of getting things open, operating them, and then getting them closed at the end of the night.
And getting everything cleaned so night janitorial could come in and do their thing. And there again, night janitorial was all men. There was no women. When you're working on a work crew and it's all guys, it can get a little raunchy sometimes, but we had fun.
Yes.
We weren't politically correct.
No. I can imagine that.
Yeah.
And, you'd razz the guy next to you. Well, nobody took offense at it. He'd razz you.
Yeah.
We weren't as sensitive as people are now.
No, yeah.
Well, you figure it's an organization where you're wearing uniforms. They're called costumes. You're wearing uniforms. You've got a hierarchy. There's all it's those things. Those sorts of things are going to result in hijinks and it's not sitting in office working at a cubicle. Let's put it that way.
Right, and summer's coming to an end, so a lot of these people are gone. They're not going to be rehired. They don't want to be rehired. So late at night, food fights develop. Things get thrown around. Young ladies do things that they wouldn't do otherwise.
Yeah.
That's the way it was back then.
Yeah.
And I got to say, when we were, like at Riverbell Terrace, we had the metal carts to put all the dishes and stuff on. We didn't have to carry that stuff. It was heavy. So we would just roll up to the table and clean it. And inside at that point, food service had their own busboys, and they had to carry the big tubs. Mm-hmm. And forever they were trying to get into janitorial so they wouldn't have to work so hard. You think about those plates, they get heavy in a hurry.
Yeah, I was a busboy for 2 years at the Plaza Inn, and we had those tubs, and yeah, you'd put the tub on a stand right next to the table, and you'd load it up. You go to the next one, you'd load it up. I think sometimes those tubs were 75 pounds, or more.
Oh, that'd be just pure misery.
Yeah.
And, Casa de Fritos, Riverbell Terrace, we always had carts we rolled up and just scooped all the stuff in the trash in the front and then separated the plates, rolled them into the kitchen, and dumped it in for the dishwashers.
I was thinking of the time frame you were there. Were you there for the day that the Yippies closed the park down?
Oh, that's another one of my stories.
Okay.
Okay, I think it was a Thursday that happened, and I was usually off on Thursday. That was my only day off. Well, I usually worked like a 7 to 1:30 shift at Coke Terrace, but for some reason there was a guy there who had chicken pox, and we were kind of short-staffed, so they said, hey, do you want to work his shift tomorrow on Thursday? And it was this weird, 2 in the afternoon to 8:30 shift. Mm-hmm. And I said, sure, I'm not proud. I'll take, the money anytime. So I showed up at, 1:15-ish, because Mom always told you if you're not 20 minutes early, you're late. And you walked past the guard shack, and there's 2 guards there checking your time cards to make sure you punched in, which had never happened before. So then you walk down and it, went under the train tracks, came back up next to wardrobe, and you could see all these cop cars parked there in the parking lot outside of wardrobe, and you're going, God, what's going on? Because there was no internet. The news service wasn't really covering anything happening. Mm-hmm. So I got changed and walked into the janitorial office, stuck my time card in the rack, and the clerk in there goes, well, you should have called in. Why? You don't know what's going on? No. And he goes, well, go straight to Cook Terrace and don't go on Main Street. Okay. So I reported, and I think it was Wayne Culver, who was still the day guy, and he goes, what's it like on Main Street? It looked like Main Street. I don't know. And he goes, well, don't you know the Yippies are taking over Frontierland? Okay, you're an 18-year-old kid. You look at him and say, okay, what's a Yippie? Yeah. I know what a hippie is. What's a Yippie? And so, in Tomorrowland, we didn't see much going on. It was, just business as usual. But as it got later, then we started hearing that all kinds of crap is going on in Frontierland, on Main Street, and it looks like they're going to close the park early. So, okay. Well, we're still doing our thing, and we're not seeing a whole lot of, freaky people walking around Tomorrowland. And then finally they announce, okay, we're closing the park. Everybody's got to leave, whatever. And then it starts dawning on you, wait, they're closing the park way early. And by then Steve Donovan had come in, and we were told, okay, even though we're closed, basically everybody's going to hang out, right here at Cook Terrace. Don't go anywhere. And, when it's time for me to punch out, they said, okay, we'll get to the time cards, no problem. They brought the time cards over, and then we were told, okay, the gate for the back area was between Carousel of Progress and the rocket to I think by then it was Mars. I can't remember. But anyway, you got to that gate, and obviously, I'm wearing the white pants, white shirt. Well, there's an Anaheim cop there making sure you're an employee and you're going through the gate. Right. So I got to the back area, changed clothes, wardrobe was all closed, and they just said, go home, punch out, go home. So, we just punched out, got in our car, and half the streets on Harbor were all blocked off. So for me, growing up in Anaheim's no problem. I could take all the side streets to get home. And that's when we heard now they're pushing the Yippies towards the Disneyland Hotel. But they told us if you're in a car, go out towards Harbor and just keep on going. Don't stop and look. Don't try to come back in the park. Mm-hmm. If you try to get back in, they're going to fire you. Hey, I was going home. I didn't want any part of it. And it wasn't till the next day when I showed up at my usual 7:30 that I found out everything that had happened the day before. Mm-hmm. And I think in my email to you guys, I said one of the things we found out was first thing they did is when they took over the fort in Frontierland was rip down the American flag. And they were going to set it on fire, but one of the sweepers that was assigned to Tom Sawyer Island captured the flag and took off with it so they couldn't burn it.
Those are crazy.
Yeah, custodial people are everywhere. That's how.
Yeah.
We're always in the action there. That's how it was.
And what people don't realize, that pan and broom makes a hell of a weapon.
Yeah.
We had the old metal pans, and they hurt.
Right. I always figured that if I ever got into a tight spot, the metal pan could be wielded to ward off somebody.
And that broom, we were using the little small handled wooden broom back in those days, and we could twirl brooms and do all kinds of stuff. But anyway, those also, they were as good as a nightstick when you hit somebody.
Oh, yeah. Yep, anyway, we had our tools.
Yes, sir. Janitorial was always prepared.
If things got really, really hairy, we had gum scraper. We had handheld gum scrapers, not necessarily the long ones, but
with about a 4-inch razor blade.
Yeah. So
Yeah, we have
we
those too.
So we weren't defenseless. We weren't defenseless
No.
if it came down to it. So.
No, okay, I'm only 5'6", and I was small. There's a lot of guys I worked with in janitorial who were big dudes that played football for SC or one of the universities. And you figured they could take care of business if it came to that.
John, thank you so much for coming on, and it's fun to get to talk to other, custodians, because we could totally relate, and our listeners by now have can probably relate now too, because they've heard plenty of other stories that all kind of connect. Some of the names you mentioned, like Ray and Chuck, and it's just really neat how all the stories connect and the people. And
it was,
yes.
I think, a better time then.
Mm-hmm.
We had a good time at work. Everything wasn't so politically correct and corporate, aimed. We were, we wouldn't. It was Disneyland was a fun place to go, and we weren't worried about the bottom line.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot's changed over the years, but that's, it's grown a lot and become, I mean, of course, when you started, it was the only Disney theme park there was. So,
Yep.
True.
The whole company was a lot smaller. So.
Right. And I mean, Walt had only been dead a few years when I started. And so there were still a lot of guys I worked with who used to walk with Walt in the mornings.
Yeah.
It was a more close-knit community back then.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your stories with us. It's been great to have you for this episode.
Sure, and if you guys are ever in Reno, just give me a call. There's always a warm bed here and some meals.
Thank you.
Okay. Wow. What an episode.
Yeah, I never know how these are going to turn out. It's we try to draw out the stories of how people tell us their stories, their experience of working there, and I think it turned out wonderfully.
Oh yeah.
He had some really great stuff to share, and I like how it just each time we have somebody else from our department or who spent time in custodial tell us their stories. It's filling in pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And it's like, they were at the same event as so and so was, and here's their take on it. And it's just, I think it's great. I just love doing this. Yeah,
it reminds me of our books.
Yes, get our books. It'll be very reminiscent of. Because we were both sweepers. And so it's always good to get a perspective from bussers, just as it is from night crew, because we were day crew.
And years before we started.
We were, when he started, we were just being born, or not even born yet, or just.
Yeah.
So it's great to get that perspective, because we weren't. It wasn't like we were at the parks then, and aware.
Yeah. For sure. Well, we will have more of that. We always like having former cast members on, and that was another good one. Before we go, though, I wanted to read a couple. I said that if we had reviews on iTunes, that I would read those, and it looks like we do. We have another week with some more reviews, so I'm going to get to it. Now, again, when you read it on your phone, it cuts off a little bit of the title for some reason, so you have to use your imagination. So the title of this one is Now 55% More, and February 24th, 2023, 5 stars from BigBrianNC.com. Okay. It says, I have enjoyed the Sweet Spot podcast for a number of years now, but I think it bears saying that the recent adjustments to the format of the show, splitting it up between news episodes and feature episodes, usually interviews, has seemed to make this always better than average Disney fan podcast into a more consistently powerful show. Congratulations, you guys, on a show that has found a way to continue to improve.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad. I'm glad that we're getting some positive feedback on that change. I like it too.
Yeah.
So,
And now that we have
thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you. And now that we have the positive out of the way, no, just kidding. So we have another positive one. This one is titled "By Disneyland Fans for," and it cuts it off. This was just on Monday. This was Monday, whatever that date was. I don't know. A few days ago. So this is 5 stars from David Rack. It says, "This show has quickly become my favorite go-to podcast covering Disneyland. The hosts are knowledgeable and inject the right mix of facts, humor, and even sarcasm where appropriate, and are always fun to listen to. Congratulations on a great show."
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate getting reviews. That helps us out a lot.
That's good to know that we're humorous, because sometimes it doesn't feel that way. Yes, so thank you so much. And if you'd like to leave a review, if you've been listening to the show for more than one episode and you enjoy it, go on to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, whatever, and leave a review, and we'll read it on the next episode. Don't forget to go to our website, thesweepspot.com, and you can get all the information on Patreon, our books, t-shirts. Also, there's a discount code for Howard Johnson's hotel, if you're wanting to stay. And concierge, if you want to book a trip, you can go and click on the link there. So there's all the information's on our website, thesweepspot.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk with you next time.